and welcome to the dark side. Either I or Mr. Storm are having some internet issues, can't tell which. But for now, let's go on and let's see what happens with his internet issues. We'll just let him work that out. Hopefully you guys can see me. If you can, just pop a comment in and say hello, because we love your interaction at the best of times, and we are so delighted to be with you this evening for the dark side. So we're going to dive right in. We missed last week, but we're going to dive right in, and we're going to look at our first news story of the day. So this one took me a little bit by surprise, and I also think that I had to really process what was happening. You got this. Thank you. Somebody knows I'm here. Thank you very much. It's not me then. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Oh, sometimes it's difficult when you feel like you're alone in the room, but we are glad that you are with us. Thank you, Sharon. We are just so happy to continue. Sharon, I should say that properly. My apologies. Otherwise, you will be leaving us and not following along. Right. Let's do this. The first news story that we have for you today is about the USA, and it is to do with the baby milk formula shortage. I don't know if you've heard about this. It kind of came onto the radar a little bit, and the way that I learned about it is that the pastors in the States were trying to mobilize their churches to become centers to help with the distribution of the milk formula to the right people, and to help kind of smooth that process out. I was really proud of them that they were thinking about doing this. But then I thought, why do pastors need to be distributing milk formula? This is really odd, baby milk formula. So I then had to have a look it up, and basically there has been complete and utter milk shortages. There's a real crisis over there, so much so that sitting President Joe Biden has enacted the Defense Production Act, which is a wartime measure. So they normally only do this when they're in war, and of course there's shortages, and so they will get the army to ship things in from other places. And so in this case, the Pentagon are flying in shipments of baby milk from overseas in order to help minimize the problems that they're having. So imagine that you have your armed forces, and now they're actually being used to courier in baby milk formula to stop this because it's gone really badly. There is a company at the center of this whole thing. Basically, they're called Abbott, and they were shut down in February after the death of 2 babies. And the company issued a complete product recall amid concerns over bacterial contamination. This then caused the FDA, which are the Food and Drug Administration out in the States, to do an investigation, and they uncovered a number of anomalies at the plant. This included bacterial contamination, leaks in the roof, and a lack of basic hygiene. The company says there's no conclusive evidence linking its products to infant illnesses or death. How can you have so here from a parenting perspective, when we have to prepare milk formula, you have to wash your hands, you have to make sure everything is sterilized, you have to be ultra clean and tidy because you're giving formula to a small child. After a while you get used to the whole formula and you don't even think about it. But parents tend to take a huge amount of precautions actually with what goes into their baby, particularly mouth. If you aren't able to breastfeed for whatever reason, some babies are allergic, some others they don't latch, all kinds of reasons why a mother isn't able to use breast milk and will use formula. And in those formative months, it's really, really important that you are hygienic. The fact that they had a basic lack of hygiene blew my mind, because I was like, how does that even happen? Anyway, the story doesn't end there. Today, the news is out that this same said company is going to start production but a few months later. And the reason that they're doing this is that they want to shift, of course, this problem and put production back on. Okay. So I hear you think to yourself, basic lack of hygiene, concerns with leaks in roofs, contamination. Have they fixed all of these problems? Well, it says, we are working hard to fulfill the necessary steps to restart production of their formula. The main formula that they're beginning the reproduction on is their EleCare, which is the special formula for children with severe allergies and with digestive problems. So these are babies that are in special care units often, or they're babies that are within just who have digestive issues or maybe have allergies, they get put onto very, very specialist milk. So they want to first deal with that before they get to the rest of the formula. Did you read anything about them fixing anything to do with anything? I was like, what is happening? My mind was completely blown at this story. I'm really feeling for parents. All of this, of course, is being done to the backdrop that there is on the table the notion that they're going to rescind the rights for abortion, that they're looking at reproductive rights and they want to repeal all of that. But you can't keep babies healthy and safe when they're there. A little bit disturbing for me. Mr. Storm, did you have anything to add to this story?
Look, here's the thing, I think it's just a continuation of the callous nature that lives don't really matter in the US, right? The fact that so many foods which people consume in the US are not available in other countries around the world.
There is that, right?
And there's a reason for that. Because they're not considered safe for human consumption. But profit trumps everything.
Yes.
And if there's a way to make a profit, if you cut corners to do it, then, so be it. And I think it's easy for some people to say, well, then you just breastfeed the child. Well, the problem with that is that you have single mothers that might have to leave the child with someone. You have some women that can't breastfeed.
Well, also in the States, you have to jump straight back into work. So saying just breastfeed the child, okay, but do you have a mother or who lives with you, or an adult who lives with you, who is available to just come to your workplace and pick up your breast milk, or allow the baby to be fed while they're at work? Are you able to pump? It's an unrealistic expectation that women just have access to these safe environments in which they could pump, that they could give the baby, because they're back to work within weeks of having a child.
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot of issues and grounds to be covered with this story, and I think the fact that so many people are not concerned about it, and when I say so many people are not concerned about it, I'm speaking specifically of the anti-choice lobby, right? It's like all lives matter, all babies' lives matter until they're born.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, right?
Absolutely.
So the fact that there's no uproar, there's no protest, there's no outrage from this sector or segment of society, I believe is telling and indicative of just how little they believe in what they say.
No, yes, agreed. 100% agreed. Yeah, and I think we could have covered a number of stories this week that covered this issue in a different way. This one, as I said, just struck me because, as I said in the lead up, it surprised me that the way that I found out about it was through a pastors group where they were trying to mobilize a network of American pastors to figure out how they could be, suppliers of baby milk within their local communities, and could they help to distribute stuff, and would that be a safe way of doing it, and so on and so forth. And I was just like, oh, that's a really great initiative. Why do you need that? What's happening with baby milk? And just knowing that, there is this huge tension in America over the rights of a woman's body, the rights of, the unborn child, so on. It's also cloudy, but yet when you have an actual human being alive, babies in front of them, They're not in uproar about healthcare. They're not in uproar when the baby has no milk. They're not in uproar about anything to do with the life of that child. And I'm just like, I don't know. I believe that you really care about babies. I don't know. Just don't feel it. But that's just me. That's just me. So on to our second story. Our second story takes a different turn altogether. Some of you may know that it is the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. That's not what I wanted to go into today, but it does lead us to something very interesting. So because of the backdrop of the Queen's Jubilee and the Queen being the one of England, that variety, because of this backdrop, the news media has been full, even in the States, even in other countries, has been filled with this is what she's doing. People have been sending their greetings and messages. And one of the things that we've been seeing a lot of, forgive me, is the Commonwealth. Now, for those of you who closely watch this show, you will know that we have talked about Barbados independence. Woo-hoo! We have talked about how other Caribbean countries are wanting to follow suit, how they're trying to figure out how to, you know, get the Queen off their money and out of their country and get the English people away. But you've also seen us talk about the other backlash of this, which is that sorry, I'm giggling because, of course, when Brexit was occurring, you will remember, I think we were covering news stories that talked about the fact that the UK was saying we'd like closer ties with the Commonwealth because now that we're leaving Europe, we need another set of people that we need to be tied to. And the Commonwealth is the one. I just wanted to put this up. Oh, Shireen, I'm so sorry. It's so embarrassing to be part of this nation. Well, we're going to talk about another nation it's embarrassing to be part of. So the UK has this whole thing. So as you imagine, the BBC, which is our national broadcasting network in the UK, has many stories on the Queen, and front and center was this story: Queen's Platinum Jubilee, the Nigerian boss who applied to be the monarch's footman. Oh, that's sorry, what now? So, you know, just out of curiosity, I thought I'd read what was the story actually about. And so this is a Nigerian banker. He's the head of one of the largest banks in Nigeria, but he remembers being at university in the UK and he wanted to expand his work. And so he'd applied to be one of the guards in the royal household, so on and so forth. What's interesting, what I found really interesting, is that nowhere else on the page have many of the Caribbean countries been mentioned as part of the Commonwealth, but Nigeria got front and center. And then the article goes on with just this wonderful piece that said that basically Nigerians don't care. They're up to other things today. This weekend, it doesn't bother them that the Queen's having a platinum because they've got other pressing issues in their country, like elections. And there was a shooting and a kidnapping over the weekend at a Christian church, and other things are going on for them that really the Queen is the last thing on their mind. The article then went to wrap up, and this is my favourite line. The British Commonwealth of Nations currently has 54 countries in its membership, founded in 1931. It's an organisation of countries that were formerly under British rule. Membership is voluntary and includes 18 other independent African nations alongside Nigeria. The most recent members, Rwanda and Mozambique, have no historical ties to Britain but applied for membership and were permitted to join. There is still something to be said for being in the Commonwealth. That was the conclusion of the article. And it just horrified me that this was the story that they thought, we need some color on the page. We need to put some people, representation and diversity. And this was the story you went through. Just made me think of all the times that you're promoting an idea that really people are trying to get out from under, and they're trying to distance themselves from, and they're trying to ask for their stuff back from you because British rule really took a lot from them. And on the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, what you're trying to promote is the idea that the African nations love the Queen, even though the article says they don't, and that the other African nations have joined. Mr. Storm?
Look, Bun Liz, yeah? Bun Liz.
Well, it's not so much about her. It's really about the fact that you want to use 19 African nations to prove a point that you ruled the world. What's wrong with you? Wait, I mean, what is wrong with you as British people? Like, what? Maybe that's just me. Maybe that's just me.
Look, Bun Liz and her inbred family. That's all I'm gonna say, right? They all inbred. And if anyone has issues with that, look, Liz is married to her cousin. Yeah. So that might explain the way some of them are, might explain some of Andrew's behaviors. Look, what's that face for? I'm saying when you inbreed, don't expect people to come out all well in the head.
Do you know, I wasn't saying anything. My face was just a picture of, you know, supportive life.
Look, yeah, I do think there's a spin in the story, and I do think what people are neglecting to mention is that Nigeria fought for its independence, right? So this whole concept of Nigeria and all these other countries and their affinity to Britain, no, they wanted to be independent,
right?
And I think being part of the Commonwealth, I think there are some benefits that go along with it. In terms of trade and things like that, but yeah, it doesn't really mean much. And the reality
season, of course.
Yeah, and the reality is that the UK will do all that they can to take advantage of these countries.
Well, and this being the irony, because wasn't it a few weeks ago that we had a story where they were trying to ship out the illegal immigrants to a nation that we mentioned this evening? Was that not?
No, I want to correct you on that. Not illegal immigrants.
Sorry. That's true.
Because they were legally there.
Yeah.
They were coming as asylum seekers.
That's true.
Right?
That's true.
So they are legally in the UK and they wanted to ship them out. Look, as I said, I pointed out in the other show, there's a lot of hidden details in that story. Look, as I said, if the British government are talking, if Lizzie's government is talking and the lips are moving, just don't believe anything they say. Don't trust anything they say. Just move on. Yeah.
Something bad is happening. Okay,
listen. I'm just gonna say it, right? As peoples of the African diaspora and Africans themselves should know, the last time they tried to sell you something like, hey, we have a brilliant cruise for you. Come for a summer cruise. We all know what happened there, yeah? So, look, I'm just saying, don't have any dealings with them.
All right, so moving swiftly on to our next story. Our next story is about a company called Axon. I don't know if you know this company. This company is called Axon. It was formerly called Taser International. So following the 30+ school shootings that the US has had this year, of course, the biggest one being that in Uvalde, Texas, where 21 people died, mostly children. There's been a lot of talk within the USA again about gun control. There is always this talk, and as an outsider it does seem to beg a belief when you're listening to it, but this story, I promise, will just top that a little bit. So this company called Axon decided that they have a solution that will help you. So they have unveiled plans for taser armed drones. So just in case you didn't quite catch that, drones that are armed with tasers to help deal with the problem of school shootings. So I'm sure some of you who are listening who are just delighted with that option, right? You can arm a drone with tasers and send it into a school. Yes. So the US company behind the plans to produce these taser gun-armed drones, claims it will help stop school shootings. That was the point. They don't want to get into the fruitless, this is their quotation, not mine, fruitless debate on gun policy in the USA. What they want to do is to find a solution. The announcement, however, earned a stern rebuke from the company's own ethics board. So let's get this straight. You come up with a public statement that says that you are going to have taser-armed drones that are going to go into schools to help with school shooter problems. And your own ethics committee publicly come out and say they are against this option. It goes on to say that they've been considering this project for about a year using either the company's own artificial intelligence or a limited pilot option. This was refused by their own ethics committee. The company that produced tasers has an ethics committee that said no to tasers armed drones. So people are questioning the owner. They're questioning the CEO of the said company, Mr. Smith, and he said, will this stop? Will this, the ethics, your own ethics company, your own ethics department have said, no, this is not a good idea to have taser armed drones going into school. Will this stop you from producing them? No, he says, reasonable minds can differ on the merits of police-controlled taser equipped drones. On our own board, we disagreed internally, but we are unanimously concerned that the process Axon has employed regarding the idea of drones in school classrooms. This is what they said. So his response is, despite the board's statement, Mr. Smith says that a proof of concept model could be ready within a year. The field trials will be possible within 2 years, and that would be pending regulatory approval. Your own ethics board said they're unanimously against what you're doing. And you've somehow found a way to monetize it and to have the idea that you should send taser-armed drones into schools to deal with school shootings. Profit before people. Profit before people. Of the good people. Oh, yeah. So if the good people with guns stay outside, you need to send something in there. So why not a taser-armed drone?
Listen, I am not against the notion of a taser-armed drone. In fact, you know what? My name will be first on the waiting list. I just don't want to send them in schools. I want to use them on my own children.
All jokes aside, I hope you guys have used to his humor.
I don't know if it's humor. I mean, sometimes those children, you just need them to sit down. Look, it's like they don't send enough weapons into schools. I think this is it's a foolish notion, and I think it's built on the faulty logic of the US in terms of to solve their weapons problem, they think they need more weapons. The ideology of, we've got armed shooters, so we need more guns, or we need more weapons. It's pretty much like saying your house is on fire, so to deal with the fire, let's just start more fire. It's a nonsensical approach. And no, Daniel, you cannot borrow it when I'm done, because I don't know if I'll ever finish with it.
Two of you, honestly. Oh, this is a form of trying to fix the consequences instead of the cause. Yes, indeed. And, I think this is, I don't even know if it's trying to fix the cause, to be honest. I think it's just trying to find a way to profit off of it, Taser armed drones in a school. Look, just the sentence doesn't make sense. But of course, your previous statement was, if the good guys with guns stay outside, then you're going to have to send something in, is well heard. This school had an armed police officer, an armed guard. This school had the rapid response team were there. but they didn't go in for over 45 minutes. And in fact, they were arresting parents who were trying to get in after a while. So, there's all kinds of challenges. But just it beggars belief that violence is the answer to everything in the States. It just beggars belief that anything that you could possibly conceive of, violence is the answer. I'm, pro-choice or anti-choice. Let's blow something up in order to prove how devoted I am to that. I'm pro-gun or not pro-gun. Let's just add more guns. It just, yeah. It's just sad. That's the US mantra: profit, problem that doesn't exist. Yeah, indeed.
The worry for me in all of this is that, okay, so say that it's approved for school shooters. How long is it before they approve use of it on the pupils themselves? Right? You saw the deployment of police into classrooms in the US. And you see the force that is used against students, predominantly students of color.
Mm-hmm.
My question would then begin is then, when will they say, well, we need this to control the children?
Yeah, indeed.
Right. So, yeah, I'm just like, look, sometimes there's no words for people's stupidity.
Yes. Sadly, you are correct. Sadly, you are correct, which will lead us on to what is our main story this evening. Let's have a look at this. They'll deploy it in Chicago next and be surprised that the taser is given a lethal dose. And that's the other thing. Tasers are not safe methodologies. They have killed people with tasers. This is not without problem cause, I think. But well, let's go on to our main story for this evening. I was hoping I could find the name of the person I was looking for before that happened, but it's not on my Twitter feed right now. So a couple of weeks ago, in fact, a week and a half, I woke up to my Twitter completely covered in hashtag SBC investigation. Yeah, it was not pretty. There were death threats. There were problems that were being highlighted. People I have followed who I didn't know were part of the SBC at one stage or another, but who are vocal advocates for either the rights of women or race relations or diversity or the rights of people who are survivors of abuse. Those sorts of people that I follow were just alight with the intensity of a report that had been released. And so it took me a minute to uncover what was happening. One particular person I followed, the death threats got so bad that someone tried to break into their child's school, and then she had to step down from the board and all sorts of things. It was horrendous. I was like, what is happening with the SBC? So the Southern Baptist Convention, for those of you that don't know, had a major investigation, nearly 300 pages, 288 to be precise. And it was an independent investigation into abuse claims within the church. And it was horrific. It was a horrific report to read by any stretch of the imagination. Mr. Storm will be bringing some of those details to you. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of some of the highlights, I think, to introduce it. But needless to say, one of the things that never ceases to amaze me when these things are done is that there should be a response to this. Absolutely. There should be some action. Absolutely. What never ceases to amaze me is that all other denominations didn't go, the Catholic Church, and it's mentioned within this news story that I have in front of me, they've had a problem with sex abuse. The SBC, they've had a problem with sex abuse predominantly. There have been a few. So my little denomination over here, that we're worshipping in, I think we should get an independent report done so that we could just weed out all the bad people straight away. We could be proactive in doing something about the problem, because we know the problem is going to exist, right? If all these churches have had this problem, because institutionally you see it not just in churches, but in schools, in congresses, in workplaces, in all sorts of places, this occurs with or without religion. As a religious institution who's mindful of people, who's invested in people, what should our response be? We are going to just be condemning them and holding ourselves to the fact that it doesn't happen here. So anyway, the investigation finds that for almost 2 decades, survivors of abuse and other concerned Southern Baptists have been contacting the Southern Baptist Convention, the SBC administration, armed to report alleged child molesters and other accused abusers. And instead of being dealt with properly, many of the cases were referred to in the report were considered, were actually victimized, they were further bullied, they were pushed out of their churches, they were abused further by the system, they were not treated in a way that actually did anything. Similar behavior that we see in all sorts of places. The leaders are often moved on or held up higher. We covered a story not too long ago about someone who came out and made some statements about, or did we cover that story?
Which story?
That's part of this, isn't it?
Which story?
The story from the pastor who stood up in the pulpit and decided to come clean about his abuse, about his affair.
No, I don't think it is about. I don't think I don't think it's included in this.
We haven't done it, have we?
Report. No.
No, but this was part of the whole thing. So it was like a whole weekend of this.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm about to tell you about a story that I thought we'd covered, but we haven't. I'm sorry. No, we didn't. Oh, so while this was all breaking to that backdrop, there were a number of pastors who were being exposed, of course, through this. And this one particular pastor stood up, and you may have seen the video where he stood up and he explained that he would be stepping down because he had had an affair. When he had finished making that statement, the woman who he had had the affair with stood up and then called into question all of the details. It wasn't an affair, it was grooming. She was an abuse victim. She was a child when it had happened. And he let her speak. His son was about to get up and stop her and kind of take back the mic and do everything. And he pulled his son back and said, no, let her have her voice. Then when he stood up again, no, it wasn't him. It was actually his son that took over when they stood up. No, he did stand up again, and he said, "You can find the video. It's sickening. I didn't watch it easily." But when he stood up again, the congregation began to call him out and said, "Was she a child? Was this what she's saying true?" And he said, "Yes, it was." It's not a pretty situation. But the SBC report, which we really wanted to talk about, continues to loom very large over the church, over that church, of course. And you are right, Daniel. The SBC was founded to allow slaveholders the right to hold church office, so nobody is surprised by this. I think that what it does tell us is that there's a lot to unpack within the report. There's a lot that Mr. Storm, I'm sure, is going to take us through. But I think for myself as a pastor, as a person who's leading in a different denomination in a different church, my immediate question is, okay, I'm looking to my left, to my right. I'm thinking, how can we be proactive? Not wait for the scandal to hit us, not wait for the one that it is. And I would hope that I don't know anyone like that. I would hope that isn't happening, of course, close by me. I would hope that if somebody is watching this and this is happening and they know me, that they could approach me, and then we would go to the police together and we would report this, and we would go and take the right, and they would feel supported and feel comfortable enough to find that I and some of my colleagues are safe spaces. But I'm not naive. I'm not naive to believe that it isn't happening. That would be really ridiculous. Of course, it happens everywhere. It's not just in the SBC. So there will be someone who comes forward with this. And in fact, when this report came out and the subsequent stories of individual pastors was coming out, there was a light in our groups with which Adventists, which is the denomination I'm a part of, are doing likewise. And so I don't know, Mr. Storm, take us through the report. Maybe that's the best thing to do so that people can understand the gravity of what we're talking about and some of the highlight issues that we're going to talk about today. Seminaries are obviously training men to pastor with their genitals. Well, you know, there are some very poor theologians whose names will not be mentioned today, who actually do have a whole video on the root word seminary and genitalia, and that's why only boys can go there. But we won't be doing that today.
Do you know, I must have missed that class in seminary of where they were telling me about the gospel of Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and D's nuts. I clearly missed that class.
Well, you were in class with me, so that's probably why. To be fair, we attended the same institution at the same time, so there's probably a reason why you don't know about that lesson. It didn't happen. It didn't happen where we were, at least not with us. Let me make that very clear. What was that? You obviously didn't. That's why you needed the taser. Indeed. Apparently, I would know about the taser then. Then I would be more proactive about us having a taser. Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's good to laugh, but in this case, I think this report just, it beggars belief, the level of intimidation that goes on. So let me and let you take center stage and deal with this.
Right. I want to start off by saying, if anyone who is watching this that comes from the same denomination, no, take it off of that view. Thank you. No. If anyone is watching this who comes from the same denomination that we do, that thinks this could not happen in our denomination, let me tell you that I personally know of a victim in which this has happened to, and that those in power and authority have colluded to cover it up. Right? So I am telling you that this is something that is very much applicable to the denomination to which we belong. Right. Now, do you know this report is so long? And it's so much in it that it's never going to be covered in this episode. So I'm going to have to gloss over and just go through quickly one or two points.
Yeah.
And I don't think I'll be able to do the actual report justice. And I think it is actually quite a well-written report.
Okay, so for those of you who want the report, please do note that it is actually on the Pastor Purple Facebook page. There is a link to an article in the Washington Post where you can click through to the full report and you can read it for yourself. It is 288 pages, but it is well worth the read. It does take time. And as I say, I think if you're holding yourself to account and you're holding your organization to account, then I think it's worth going through.
And it's important that you mention about holding the organization to account, because that is exactly what has happened here. It was the membership that held the organization to account. So typically we have GC coming up.
It's now.
Yes, okay. And the Southern Baptists have their own version of it. And what happened was, at this meeting, a motion was put forward, and many in leadership, or some in leadership, opposed.
Mm-hmm.
And the membership were like, no, we don't care what you say. We are voting this through. Yeah. Because the leadership, I believe, had originally rejected the motion, and then the membership said, no, we are passing this motion anyway, so forget you. And then the leadership sought to limit the scope of the investigation, and the membership were once again like, no, forget you. Yeah. There's too many allegations, there's too much stuff going on. We want a thorough investigation. So the membership pushed for this, and I think that is important to note. Now,
it's to be commended.
Yeah. Right. Now, what I want to say is, right, okay, so the Southern Baptist Church, they hold meetings every 2 years to vote in an executive, to vote in a president. they then send all the representatives or delegates. They all meet up, but the executive committee, out of this comes an executive committee that meets, I think, 4 times a year, right? And then there's a board of trustees outside of that.
Right.
Okay. No, sorry. The executive committee does the day-to-day running, and the board of trustees meets 4 times a year.
Right.
Okay. So it's not too dissimilar to the church that we belong to in terms of structure.
No. Well, and that, yes, many denominations have a similar setup.
Right. So what you now need to understand is what was going on within the Southern Baptist Church is that people were reporting abuse to members of the executive committee. But the executive committee was not making the board of trustees aware of these allegations.
Right.
Okay.
The information died with them.
Right. So they were acting as gatekeepers to all of this information. And then what you had occurring was that some of these people have been in their positions for decades. Okay. So these people that are there for years and years, they just gradually build power and influence, so that members that come in for a shorter time tend to defer to those that have been there longer.
Yeah.
And so this is what was happening. Okay. Does this sound familiar to an organization that you might know?
Sounds familiar to quite a few, actually. Continue on.
Okay. Right. So what also happened is that the trustees were expecting the executive to deal with the day-to-day running of things, right? So they're expecting them to deal with it adequately. It wasn't happening, right? And what the investigation did was they conducted a poll or interviews, or they went through and they inspected the social media accounts of the board of trustees. And what they discovered was that the board of trustees were invariably in favor of protecting victims of sexual abuse. Right? But once again, the executive is not giving them this information, because had they done so, it's likely that the board of trustees would have ensured that actions and practices were put in place much earlier to deal with victims of abuse. Right? And I think what this does is it highlights the effects of gatekeepers. Right? It highlights the effects of people not being transparent. And it highlights the importance of having people of integrity in positions of authority who set the agenda for such meetings, right? Because these things were never really coming up on the agenda. All right. So because the trustees are now cut out of the loop, it falls upon simply the executive to deal with it. And what was happening was that the executive, they would just ignore, in many cases, the allegations, or they would say to the victims, it's nothing to do with us, because these churches are separate entities. Right? Now, that's to ignore the fact that you could kick them out of your membership. They don't have to remain part of your coalition of churches. No. Right? And what they were often doing is trying to use legal terms and legalese to absolve themselves of any responsibility of the wrongdoing that was going on within these churches. And what they were saying was because the churches were independent, they could not come up with any framework for which to make the churches sign up to, or that was mandatory for the churches to sign up to.
What nonsense. Nonsense. Anyway, go on.
Right.
Sorry.
So, now this is what I'm going to say about this. The report sets out some recommendations. And one of the things that I find problematic with the report is that one of the recommendations that it sets out is it sets out voluntary minimum standards that churches, local associations, state conventions, and all the SBC entities can implement for the prevention, recognition, and the appropriate handling of sexual abuse and related misconduct allegations. Right? It's problematic that that is voluntary.
I mean, well, it's only problematic that it's voluntary in so much as if you are a local church and you choose not to adopt it, then everyone knows not to attend your church.
Yeah, but how would people know?
Well, I kind of think it has to be mandatory for you to say, right? I mean, we are adopting it or we're not adopting it. I should be able to check. Like,
right.
We do not operate voluntary standards for this.
You talk about this ability to check. Well, one of the problems was, and one of the things that the report highlights is that there was a suggestion that they should create a list of allegations or known offenders within the Southern Baptist Church. And there was pushback on that from certain people in the executive committee, right? Because it could lead to legal liability, right? And then eventually they did start to compile a list, but the list wasn't made public. So if an allegation came across their desk or somebody was shown to be guilty of it, they'd write it on a list, but they wouldn't give it to the church members or the other churches so that the other churches could be on guard and say, look, when people move church, hey, none of this should be happening. Now, why would there be reticence in taking such steps? Well, because one of the allegations was actually against the president of the Southern Baptist Church.
No one is surprised. Who's surprised by that? Anyone on here surprised? I'm not surprised by that.
Now, I'm going to scroll down to this part of the report. I need to find it. Now, the president was called Dr. Hunt, and what the investigators say is that they can find the allegations and the people that made the allegations, plus who they regard as witnesses, as credible, and they did not find the president's name was Johnny Hunt, Dr. Hunt. They did not exactly find him credible in his testimony. So I need to give you some details of this because this is horrific.
You need to give us the horrific details.
I do, because you need to understand just how predatory this behavior is. So the president invites a pastor. So the victim is a pastor's wife who he works with and regards as a colleague. So he invites them down to where they're staying. And then the pastor has to go away. So he says to Dr. Hunt, look, is there somewhere around here that my wife can rent to stay for a bit? So Dr. Hunt gives him the name and a number to call. And the guy says, okay, so the pastor calls, rents a place. What the pastor wasn't told was that the place was right next door to where Dr. Hunt was staying. So now what happens is, in the nighttime, Pastor's wife's out on the balcony. Dr. Hunt comes out and starts talking to her. And then conversation is, okay. And then it turns to compliments, and what she says is, inappropriate comments on her figure and things like this. So he says something about it being hot. And so she says, well, why don't you take some shade or come sit under the balcony where I am, because it's a bit cooler. So he does that. And so they continue talking. And then he says to her, oh, I don't want to be seen out here in public like this. Can we go inside? So she's like, okay. So they go inside and they're talking. And then he continues to make inappropriate comments about her. Right. And then he kisses her. Right. He starts to pull up her top and feel her breasts.
What kind of mess is this?
He pulls down her skirt.
Excuse you?
Right. And yeah, there seems to be a bit of stuff going on. Right. So now what happens is she tells him to stop. What are you doing? And so he stops, or should I say, he pauses, and then he starts kissing her again and trying to pull her shirt down. And she says she stood there frozen because she didn't know what to do, and she was just hoping that he would stop. So he eventually seems to get the hint and stops, right? And leaves. Now, I don't know what story he spun to his wife, but his wife approaches the woman the next day and tells her she needs to stay away from her husband and just go home. Right. So the woman goes home, and she speaks to her husband about it. Right.
It's not just me with that comment then. Sounds like a David move to me. I mean, that's literally what I thought. David Bathsheba, what kind of rapist business?
Right.
His wife. I mean, I
right.
can't even.
So the woman goes home. Her husband speaks to her husband about it. Then they have a meeting at the church with Dr. Hunt, the woman, her husband, and another guy who was meant to be the count.
Oh no, has his internet dropped at the worst parts of this conversation? This is terrible. Anyone else shocked by this madness? Just me. Mr. Storm's internet has dropped as the stories get worse. The report is awful. Okay, so let's respond to a few things. What are your thoughts on these issues? I mean, listening to this report, where I think there was a number of things that stood out to me.
Hello?
Oh, you're back. Hi.
Right. Okay. No, do you know what? I've missed an important detail.
Oh, God.
Right. So, got to rewind the story a bit. After that night, right? No, I have to rewind the story a bit. I have to rewind the story. So that night of the abuse, after Dr. Hunt has left, he sends a text message to the woman saying, "Oh, he wants to talk to her about what happened." So she's like, she wants to sort it out. So she goes on the balcony because the balconies are adjacent to each other. So they're on the balconies, and she wanted to sort out what happened. So she went outside to speak to him. And in the exchange that happens, Dr. Hunt says to her that he would like to have sex with her 3 times a day. Right.
I'm losing this. I'm losing this Optimus
Right.
business. Just slowly
So,
diminishing my body.
so she goes back in. So anyway, back home, they have a meeting. So they have a meeting, and it's Dr. Hunt, the woman, her husband, the pastor, and another person called Roy Blankenship. And he was meant to be the counseling pastor at the church at FBC Woodstock, right? Now, during this discussion, it is here that the pastor learns that Dr. Hunt has sexually assaulted his wife, right? Dr. Hunt mischaracterized his assault as admitting to a light kiss, touching the survivor's breast over her clothes, and trying to pull her shorts down. And then goes on to state, no, this is where you know there would have been pure violence. There would have been pure violence. Because he then went on to state, and I quote, "Thank God I didn't consummate the relationship." End quote.
I'm sorry, what now? Who? Hey,
There'd
what?
be violence. I'm just being real here, right? There will be violence.
I'm confused. I'm confused.
Now, here's the thing. You didn't just mischaracterize the whole thing, but you mischaracterized what happened, your assault, as a relationship.
Consummate the relationship. Consummate the what in the name of the Lord in heaven are you saying?
Right.
You mean thank the Lord he didn't consummate the relationship? What? How many people you consummated relationships with? What are you talking about? What?
Right. Now, this is where it gets worse. Because it's about to get worse.
Oh, it gets worse. Okay, so all of this wasn't the worst.
Oh no, it gets worse.
Okay,
so I told you Mr. Blankenship was meant to be the counseling pastor.
Yes, I remember,
right?
Mr. Blankenship. Okay.
Okay. He said that in his expert opinion, an inappropriate relationship had developed. And based on his information, it was consensual.
Excuse you, what?
Oh, no. This still gets worse.
Oh, God. 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 Oh, God.
Right. Now, how does this get worse?
You could tell me that they recommend that the man whose wife this all happened to, divorce his wife.
No. He said it was consensual because she didn't fight back.
So because her fight, flight, freeze was freeze, that's what you account as consensual, because her fight, flight, freeze is
right. So now in this meeting, or the view of the meeting of
consent's going to help on this one.
In the view, right, of the meeting, what happened was the woman and her husband said in this meeting that when she tried to speak, both Dr. Hunt and Mr. Blankenship would speak over her. Right? Right. So on top of that, right, what happened was he based his opinion of events on what the Dr. Hunt had said. He never took her story. She never got to present her story.
We can tell.
Okay. Right. Okay. They then said to them, Dr. Hunt and Mr. Blanchard said to them that they could never speak about it. And if they did, it would irreparably harm the 40,000 churches for which Dr. Hunt was responsible. Right? So, right. Okay. Now, here we go. Let me ask you a question. What did I tell you Mr. Blankenship's role was?
Counseling pastor.
Now, what if I were to tell you he is not a licensed counselor in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah, but that was very obvious. No
So,
one is surprised.
No,
Who's surprised? You are surprised? You guys online are surprised. I'm not surprised by that.
Right. So they sent the abuse victim to somebody who's not trained to deal with abuse, who further abused her. Right?
Yes.
And for me, I think also we have to look at the fact that this was an emotional and spiritual abuse that now takes place. Because you try to keep them silent by saying, well, think about other people.
Yep.
What about other people's salvation? What about, and I think that is a tool that is often used by Christian institutions to silence their membership when wrongdoing occurs.
Yeah.
Right? It's never, we should have done the right thing in the first place so that we, the institution, are mindful of people's salvation. It's always a responsibility that is placed on the individual members, or usually the victim themselves, to be mindful.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So that was just one story that came out of it.
One story too many.
Where is it? Right. One of the things that was also going on was that the pastor, they kept asking the pastor if he would forgive Dr. Hunt.
So you ain't talking to the victim. She's not a whole person in her own entity. This is what's wrong with headship theology right there. This is what's wrong when you distort the whole theology of humanity and turn it into some twisted, ridiculous notion that women aren't whole people in their entire right, made in the image of God, because they need permission from their husbands to speak. Their husbands have to speak on behalf of any wrongdoing. What foolishness.
Right. Absolutely. Right. And the pastor said, yes, he would forgive it. Yes, he would forgive it. But subsequent conversations with the pastor said he felt pressured into saying he had to forgive him. Right.
I'm sure.
And some of the witnesses have said that the pastor afterwards has been dealing with issues of anger.
Of course.
Which is understandable.
Hello, somebody.
And also for the victim in this, he said that another witness said that he could see how hard it was for her to trust people within the church organization.
Who are you going to trust?
Well, there you go. But for me, right. So I'm mentioning this because I think it highlights the importance of churches, organizations, and institutions to do the right thing when issues of wrongdoing come up, right? Because you want to talk about salvation, you want to talk about all of these things, but the reality is,
any of those things.
You can't talk about any of those things unless you do the right thing.
No.
Right? Now, Right.
So while you
Now,
find your nice next point, Daniel said, I hate how Christianity is weaponized to affirm the patriarchy. And, I have to agree. I think this is one of the things that comes out in these reports every single time. And quite a few people have alluded to in other coverings of different reports within the Catholic Church or within the church in Ireland or all these different places, is that the idea of patriarchy is not necessarily inherent to religion, but religions abuse that idea in order to get away with more sinful things, so to speak. And so, not that patriarchy, not that the idea of the inequality between men and women is inherently going to lead to abuse, but that when it is there, when there is an inequality between men and women, and they are using scripture, whichever scripture you follow, it doesn't matter which religion you are, there are many that follow these ideas. And if you inherently abuse those scriptures to mean that the humans are less than, that women are less than, and that there's a patriarchal system, it makes abuse easier. It just makes it a lot easier for people who are inclined that way. And it's not that abuse doesn't happen everywhere else, but it's just a lot easier to do it if your whole church system tells you that the person standing opposite you who's a woman is less than human, right? That's the whole, she doesn't have any rights, she has no voice, she doesn't, when she speaks, then she's an irritation, the abuse is much simpler. It's just much easier when you can weaponize your religion, particularly in this case, of course, we're talking about Christianity, against a whole entire portion of your humans. I mean,
right.
Anyway. All right.
So I mentioned about the fact that there's been pushback within the SBC over the years in terms of trying to implement change and how to protect victims of domestic abuse. Sorry, not domestic abuse, sexual abuse. Right. So what happened? Well, there's been quite a few incidents of the pushback, but I'm just going to give one. Where is it? So this in 2000.
Okay, just tell us the story. We can read the report later.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, so what happened was, remember I said that there was a small number on the executive committee that were pretty much leading everything. And then they had the lawyers, the internal and external counsel, legal counsel. So what was happening was the external legal counsel had been or has been their counsel since the 1960s or something stupid like that. So they know all the dirt. They know everything that's been going on. And they have been a large factor in why nothing got done. Because they kept saying to them, we need to avoid legal liability. We need to avoid legal liability. So there was a program that was developed by a pastor on sexual abuse. Or a pastor was seeking guidance on the issue of sexual abuse topics and how to deal with it. And there was one of the presidents at the time, or the president of the SBS at the time, was a gentleman called Dr. Patterson. And the pastor wrote asking for guidance. And Dr. Patterson responded, or his response was that he should do this course, or the no, let me put it clearly. The pastor noted that Dr. Patterson's response was not to do with the issue of how to prevent sexual abuse within the church, but rather how to escape legal liability for any sexual abuse that would occur. Right? And Dr. Patterson wrote, quote, "The fact that there are fairly frequent lawsuits now being filed against churches and sexual abuse cases. Interestingly, to my knowledge, even to this date, not one of those charges has been successful in those cases where the churches could document that they had made some effort to educate those who worked among children as to how to watch for and respond to dangers." End quote. The pastor then notes that Dr. Patterson said this could be achieved by churches holding a lunch and a 1-hour awareness seminar. Right? That was it. Just a 1-hour awareness seminar, and that is it. Right? So it shows that there was no real attempt or belief that this was a serious matter. Because I assure you, if it came down to, if any pastor asked the organization on how to protect church money,
you're gonna have longer than a 1-hour seminar. I can reassure you of that.
Right.
You gonna have a few days. You gonna sit in on quite a few days. In fact, our churches are notorious for having many meetings about financial securities. So whatever. Yeah. Well, I think this is an interesting case, and I'm looking at the time now, so I know that there's a lot more to be said. But one of the things that's been interesting in our discussions, of course, before this, prepping for this show, was just how much collusion was happening, how many people were being kept in the dark who had the power to change things, and how, in the end, it was institution before people, right? So the church is no longer people, but it's an institution. And because it's an institution, then we're putting that institution above the actual people. And therein lies your challenge.
I just want to say just how bad and how far this goes on. As I said, that I spoke to you of Dr. Hunt. I'm now speaking to you of Dr. Patterson. This shows that it goes across the years, across the administrations.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
This abuse goes, and like this, there's a president in there in one of the stories who he's made aware of a case of abuse, right? And he denies knowing anything about this person, says the person that is alleged to have committed the abuse isn't affiliated with the church, right? And then it turns out that the dude is working in a church just down the road from where he goes to church and ministers. So the idea that he isn't aware of who the abuser is, patently isn't true.
Yeah,
and has no knowledge. And there are stories of where they just get moved on to another church, and they get moved on to another church, and they get moved on to another church. And the abuse and the cycle of abuse keeps happening. It's pretty much how in other churches pastors are caught with wrongdoing, and then they just move to another area or another part of the world in which that church exists. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's all done just to prevent legal liability. And for me, one of the things that comes out in this case is how often the victims say that they're not listened to. We want to be heard. We want to be seen. We want this to be taken seriously so it doesn't happen to another person. And I look at these things and I'm like, one, if you want to limit your legal liability exposure on these things, do the right thing in the first place. Train the people properly in the first place. And when someone screws up, take ownership of that. Because I can pretty much guarantee you that if you took ownership of that, took the right steps, and first of all, calling the police where appropriate to do so, right? And then ensuring that these people can never be in a position of power or authority within your organization again, that many of the victims, yes, you should still compensate, but they won't be seeking to take you to court. They will simply be happy at, you know what, I've been seen, I've been heard, you recognize the wrong that was done to me, and you have taken steps. You've made reparations for that wrong. Right? Yeah. What happens to that person legally? As I said, if what they've done is a crime, off to jail they go. That's just consequences of your actions. But I think also there's a whole blackmail thing that takes place within Christianity, and it's based off this false notion of not taking your church brethren to court and getting legal authorities and powers involved. And that's actually not the biblical process. The biblical process is you try to resolve it without it having to get that far. But there's some things that you need to take your dirty bungle behind to jail for.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that people aren't discerning about the fact that actually in the end, when it comes to issues of sexual abuse and those sorts of claims, the church isn't equipped to deal with that. We're not equipped to handle that sort of. So even if you want to say, oh, but I need to talk and take this to my brother and then take it to the leadership. What do the leadership know about sexual abuse? Nothing. This is not the place for that. You need to take this to a proper authority.
Oh, I think you'd be surprised. I think you'd be surprised that the leadership know a lot about sexual abuse, because judging from this story, the perpetrators.
Yeah, but my point being, you know, if you come to me, so if I can now take this to a real practical sense, you know, I pastor churches both online and in the real world, right? And if you bring that to me as an issue, the first thing I'm going to tell you is that I'm a mandatory reporter. I will report this, and I will hold your hand through the whole process, but I'm going to go to the proper authority. I am not the proper authority to deal with this. I am the proper authority to sit with you while you're reporting. I'm the proper person to be with you when this is hurting while you have to go for counseling. I'm not the proper authority to actually process this crime, and it's a crime. We're not talking about something that is, I have a grievance against my brother or sister. Yeah, I got yes, grievance. When you bash my corns, when you speak bad about me, okay, grievance. No, when you lifting up people's tops and pulling down their shorts and sexually assaulting them, not grievance, crime. And that means that you have to go and pursue it in the proper way. And I think, you know, it's really sad that people think people kind of seem to assume that a grievance is the same as a criminal action, right? I have a grievance against this person. No, they sexually assaulted you. That's a criminal act. It's not a grievance. I don't have grievance against you. These are two different things. And I think it's just sad that in Christianity particularly, as I said, this goes across the whole world. So there'll be people watching this who are not Christians who are like, see you, but then will know about work environments within which this happens, right? It happens all over. But in Christianity particularly, there seems to be this head in the sand to equate criminal actions with these small conflicts that we have. They're not the same thing, and they should be treated differently, and you should do things properly, and that's it, period. I think that's why they're against women in ministry, because women will be more empathetic and hold men accountable. Well, I think I will say this, right? And I think that this is really where the rubber meets the road. You can only have women in ministry where your theology matches it. Because what we've seen in this case, one of the cases that Mr. Storm mentioned was actually about the wife coming and attacking the woman, right? She came out and was like, you need to leave my husband alone and go, because she's conditioned also. It doesn't just work to have women representing it. You have to have your whole theology overhauled, and then it becomes different. And yes, it's true that more representation, more diverse representation, women, ratio of women to men, also different ethnicities, different cultures, actually makes the environment in which you work safer. That's true, because any cultural norms can be worked out, any ridiculousness. But if your theology backs the position of the man, employing a woman ain't going to help you, because she will have been conditioned to defer her voice to him always, and to defend him. And so I think that that's an important thing to bring out in that case. Yes, I do believe that it works overall, but actually in a lot of these organizations, women hold the secretary position and are counted as, see, we're diverse in employment. No, you're not. You're employing women in lesser positions and not giving them a voice. It doesn't work that way.
I think Daniel is right when he says that they're equipped for tithe and offering. And I think perhaps if we want to deal with removing sexual abusers from our congregations, that perhaps we just need to stop saying that they're sexual abusers and say that they stole the tithe money. Because I guarantee you that ain't nobody talking about, hey, we need to sort this out with our brother. They called in the police one time. That person, listen, they'll be off-road tomorrow.
Well, right? Yes and no. I think there are cases where, we know in our lifetime that people have done dubious things in that way, in previous places we've been involved. And they've moved to other parts of the world, just moved conveniently to other parts of the world. Whether the information was fully known when they went to that other part of the world, I don't know, but there have been those cases. I think you're right, hitting them. I hate to say that, but obviously that's why the liability issue becomes a factor, because what they're saying is you will be hitting us where it hurts. We don't care about whether you've been personally injured. We don't even care whether this pastor did or didn't do it, or is nice or isn't nice, or whatever you want to call it. What we care about is that you're going to financially affect us. We don't care about the reputation. Liability is about financially protecting yourself. You don't care about your reputation. You don't care about the person's reputation. We're only protecting you in as much as we want to keep the money that we have and abuse the money that we have in the ways that we are abusing it. Because don't forget, and this I think is really important to note, those organizations that often are hiding abusers and are then bullying the abuse victims, right? Often they're not using the money to the benefit of the church. I don't mean to be funny, but it's not going to the benefit of the people. They just want their money to do what they want with their money as an organization. That doesn't mean it's being helpful, because if it was being helpful, then you would invest in counselors to actually trained, qualified, actual counselors, real psychologists, to help with the people in your church. Just saying, because that's what your people need.
Listen, I believe that churches should have a trained counselor employed in their staff somewhere, or made available. So if you belong to a larger organization, so for example, like take the Southern Baptist churches. Since we're speaking about it, for example, some of the smaller churches might not be able to afford it, but I think what the umbrella organization should do, because the churches are independent, is have a body of psychologists and counselors available on retainer so that people can approach them, can get help for their problems in this. But I think if they did that, they would uncover so much abuse within their churches that they wouldn't know what to do with it. And once again, I think the reason they don't want to do that is because they're scared that if people actually get help, it opens them up to legal liability for all the wrongdoing issues that they've done.
You think the sad thing is you can't be so afraid of doing the right thing. I know a church denomination that has a counseling service within its midst, and I know that. One of the questions that always gets pulled in is how do we keep that service independent? How do we maintain the integrity of the service so that members who would like to use the service can use it without fear of seeing their counselor at, at their local church gathering and feeling uncomfortable, and maintaining the integrity, and also the crossover between, that it's not the leadership's partners that are the counselors. As qualified as you are, you need to find your job elsewhere. The church, it's a conflict of interest if you're going to be in that kind of service, so on and so forth. Or at least people have the option not to go to the leadership's partner, no matter how qualified they are, but can pick other counselors to go to that have that. And I think it's a good suggestion. I think the fact that we don't have independent, qualified, real qualified psychologists on, as an organization. We have schools, we have hospitals, we have many things, but actually having opening practices to help people where they need it, and with mental health being such a big thing, it combats a number of issues in one go. But one of the things it does mean is that you have someone employed who's a mandatory reporter, so that when children come forward, when people come forward with criminal actions, somebody can report this stuff and actually do that independent of your employees, and it can be against your employees, right? So these are presidents and leaders and stuff like that. I think there was a couple of things that I took from this, from what we were talking about. One is the false notion of voting. So, of course, this false idea that because we vote for our leaders, then we're able to have some control or some power over who we put in power, and we can change the atmosphere, we can change it. Well, the SBC proved that they were able to maintain an entire decades and decades worth of the same leadership, basically, and the same leadership ideas, regardless of how many years they changed the president and it wasn't the executive board, it was the other part. That however many times they changed that, they still had managed to maintain the same ethos of avoiding legal liability, retaining the same kinds of lawyers, keeping the same kinds of practices, intimidating abuse victims, so on and so forth, and covering up for decades, because somehow, even though members were voting for new leadership, there was a gap in the leadership program. And I think that right there tells us that we need to really look at how structures are done if you are going to continue in this denominational structure, and see how you actually eliminate that gap. If you're going to give members the power to vote in leadership, then that leadership should be able to see all of the systems and be able to bring in, because as you said, those leaders that were being brought in were more in favor of the victims and supporting the victims, but somehow that wasn't actually impacting the SBC as a whole. Somehow they were managing to retain a different culture and ethos. So that's something that really struck me about the framework. Then it was the voluntary minimum standards that really, really bothered me. The kind of idea that we should have a voluntary minimum standards. And I think that this is one of the things that I think's really bothered me. When I look at, and I've only done basic training on the counselling side, okay? So I'm not a fully qualified counsellor at the top end. That's not my thing. I've got my don't come to me for your long-term counseling needs. Please go elsewhere. I'm a pastor, not a long-term counselor. But because I've stepped into that world to increase my skills and to do what I need to do, one of the things that it strikes me is the way in which those systems work. Counselors have to have a counselor themselves. They have to be held accountable to somebody. They have mandatory reporting systems, and everything is kind of in place to ensure or to minimize problematic behavior. right? You have to be a member of an independent organization of counselors so that you are vetted, so on and so forth. One of the things that it strikes me is that the denominations have provided cover for the fact that that pastors and priests and so on and so forth, leaders within church, haven't got the same. We don't have the same in terms of accountability, and we also don't have the same in terms of support, right? Nobody's holding us to that really high standard and ensuring that we have standards across the entire Christian world, across denominations. There are independent bodies who are set up to do supervision, who are set up to help with any problems that are mandatory reporters. But also that means that we're lacking the support, and the burnout rate for pastors is high. The leaving rate for pastors incredibly high. The turnover is ridiculously high for pastors. So I'm like, in resolving a problem around abuse, which shouldn't be allowed to exist in your church, you might actually find out that you help empower your pastors to be better pastors, to be better priests, leaders, bishops, whatever your terminology is. But you might find you get better quality ones because they're not going to be just running around trying to figure it out all on their own. They have good accountability lines. And I think that is something that really came out from that report. And what you were saying is there needs to be some way of actually holding a standards across the board. Like, we need to, if you're going to use this word, you need to be signed up to this organization, and these are their standards. These are the things, and they will check with you, and they will send independent reviewers in, and your denomination will pay this organization to keep you up to date. And that's what they should do. And they should be independent, and it doesn't matter what denomination you come from, but these are the standards that we're holding Christian leaders to. Punt.
You know, one thing I think I in some regards would perhaps like to see in terms, and I think it will be of the different Christian denominations working together, is that if they could get together a body of representatives from the different denominations, and all allegations of abuse were sent to this committee to oversee, right? I think you get greater accountability from it because it's not one denomination seeking to protect its reputation. Right. And in that way, it holds all denominations accountability. It maintains its independence because it's across all denominations. So it's not as though one denomination can unfairly influence or hold sway over it. And then you can deal with these matters, but as it stands, it's just leaving it in-house is just not working.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, I think setting up something independent really does have a wider reaching it has wider reaching effects than you're thinking of, because we're talking, of course, about the abuse, but it should be tied to their non-profit status. Absolutely. It should be that you should sign up to something that's independent, that's regulatory, that has a way of looking at your standards. And we have that for the finances, right? So in the denomination I work for, our finances have to be up to point on the website, published, everything has to be done. Your mission statements have to be there. But we need to have something apart from that really does look at how do we keep churches safe. And in different countries, they have different policies. But in the end, those are voluntary. They're not mandatory. No one's overseeing the whole process. And it seems to me that actually what needs to happen is there needs to be one regulatory body. We know these terms. We've heard them before. It's not unusual, that actually deals with, and at first, it's going to be hard. And it's going to be difficult, and we're going to hear the awful stories. But as the years go by and you start weeding out all of these people and taking them off your payroll and putting them where they need to be, jail, getting rid of these people, you might actually find that after years of doing this, it gets a little bit easier. No change is going to come overnight. It's not going to just happen like this. It has to be a team effort from the whole of the Christian world saying, we're not going to accept this anymore. This is not good enough. What are our standards? We need to do something different.
Yeah. So anyway, I look, I said I'm not quite sure how they're going to deal with this moving forward, because, as I said, the fact that it's voluntary minimum, uh, hey, organizations, some churches may not take it up. Some churches may say we'll take it up and won't enforce it. And my fear is that we'll just be back where we are again in a few
Well, as
years'
I
time.
said, the reason that I heard about this report isn't because people were responding to it favorably. It was because the people who were responding to it favorably were receiving death threats, right?
Mm.
That's where we're at. And I think the reality is that if we're going to do anything, that mentality has got to change. Your response to hearing that church leadership, whatever that level is doing wrong and should be prosecuted for that wrongdoing. And some of these, of course, go to the statute of limitations, etc., but should have been prosecuted for that wrongdoing. Should mean that your response should be one of compassion towards those who are the victims, not violence to those who call it out. If your response is violent to those who call it out, then I'm going to have to say you need to go have a chat with Jesus.
Why? Jesus called out their wrongdoing and they killed him for it. These people will be putting Jesus on a cross all over again.
Well, Jesus only needed to die once. I think you'll find the Holy Spirit has other work to do. But anyway. Right, I think it's been a difficult subject. We've been on a lot longer than we are supposed to. As always, we're over time, people, but we love you very much and we're glad that you stuck with us. Please enjoy the rest of your evening, or at least try to. Maybe think about how we can do something. As we were talking about that regulatory body, I was like, some of you on here know I'm up for trying to change, but I was like, maybe we need to set up the regulatory body. Maybe we need to organize ourselves and really think about what that would mean and how to implement that safely, non-denominationally. Maybe that's something that we actually need to talk about.
Well, I mean, you say that. I just think in terms of, I believe in the UK, they have the ecumenical meetings, area meetings. And I think you have within that the framework or the district area framework in which you start setting up those sort of ideas. Because you've got the Baptist ministers there, I know some Adventists, Methodists, all of those. And you simply say, for this area, we're going to have a representative from this denomination, so all denominations represent, okay, and we'll set up a committee of these representatives to deal with any allegations that come from any church within this area.
Can be. Well, folks, it's something for us to think about. You'll let us know. Hit us up in the comments. Hit us up in the DMs. What we can do to deal with this. Thank you for those who are WhatsApping me now about this, but who are also online and participating in our discussions. We appreciate you. We appreciate all of your positive feedback. We appreciate all of the things that you're doing. God bless you. It's amazing. I'm still a Christian, even after the way other Christians behave. We're still doing it. We still believe in Jesus. It just takes a deep breath for us to hold other people accountable, I think. Right. You guys have a great evening. Peace. Mr. Storm, any last words?
Bun Lizzie.
Good night, everyone. Good night.